Nina Bassett had spent 3 years learning how to be furniture. In rooms full of men who made decisions about which businesses would survive the month and which ones wouldn't, she had discovered that a plus-size woman and sensible shoes could become effectively invisible if she tried hard enough. She kept her voice flat, and her opinions to herself. She answered questions with numbers, not sentences. She wore dark colors that didn't catch the light. She arrived early, left late, and made absolutely certain that the only remarkable thing about her presence was the accuracy of her work. It was a strategy that had kept her employed at Marchetti Holdings for 3 years without incident, until the Thursday quarterly review when she looked up from her laptop to check a date on the whiteboard and stopped breathing entirely. The medallion rested in the open collar of Alessio Marchetti's shirt, silver, worn smooth at the edges, hanging from a thin chain that disappeared into the fabric of a suit that cost more than Nina's monthly rent. A Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travelers, of the protected. Nina's fingers went still on the keyboard. Her brother Miles had owned one exactly like it. Miss Bassett. The voice came from the head of the table, low, unhurried. The kind of quiet that didn't need volume because rooms rearranged themselves around it automatically. Alessio Marchetti was watching her. He was 41 years old, dark-haired, and possessed the particular stillness of a man who had learned long ago that most threats announce themselves. His eyes moved to her with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world because he had personally ensured that no one in the building would dare waste it. Is there a problem with the numbers? Nina's mouth opened. That medallion. The words came out before she could stop them. Where did you get it? What happened next happened fast. Breck, the head of security, was out of his chair before the sentence finished. His hand closed around her forearm, not roughly, just with the firm, practiced certainty of someone who had ended conversations this way before. He addressed the question not to Nina but to Marchetti, his voice carrying the specific flatness of professional concern. How does she know about it? Not a question, an assessment. The 4 senior advisors at the table had become very still. Nobody breathed audibly. Nobody moved toward the door, because leaving without permission would have been considerably worse than staying. Marchetti raised one finger. Breck's hand opened. He stepped back. The room exhaled without sound. For a long moment, Marchetti studied Nina across the length of the conference table. His expression revealed nothing. It never did. But his thumb moved once across the chain at his collar. Everyone out, he said. Chairs moved. Men disappeared. The glass door clicked shut, and Nina Bassett found herself alone, with the man who ran the most feared criminal organization in the city, standing with her notebook pressed against her chest like a shield, trying to remember how to be useful and quiet and entirely uninteresting. Marchetti did not move from his chair. He gestured toward the seat across from him. Nina sat. Tell me, he said, what you think you recognized. She told him carefully, the way she told him everything, with precision, without unnecessary elaboration. The Saint Christopher medallion, the worn silver, the particular way it hung slightly left of center on the chain, which Miles had always said was because the clasp was loose, and he kept meaning to fix it. Marchetti's expression did not change. Your brother, he said. Miles Bassett, he was an EMT. Silence. It lasted 4 seconds. Nina counted them. She counted most things. When did he die? Marchetti asked. 12 years ago. A pause. On duty. The only visible movement was Marchetti's right hand, which settled flat on the table. Still, what was he like? That question caught her completely off guard. People who learned about Miles usually followed one of 3 scripts. They said they were sorry. They called him a hero in the practiced, reflexive way people said things that were technically true, but required no actual feeling. Or they became uncomfortable. Because a dead 23-year-old brother turned into an actual person when you started describing him, and actual people were harder to be comfortable around than solemn abstractions. Marchetti had asked none of the three things. He had asked what Miles was like. Nina's shoulders dropped approximately 1 inch involuntarily. He was annoying, she said. Something shifted, almost imperceptibly, in Marchetti's eyes. He argued with GPS. Out loud, like the GPS could hear him and might be persuaded. She looked at the table. He burned popcorn every single time, without fail. The whole station smelled like it on his shifts. His captain started leaving notes on the microwave. A pause. He made origami cranes when he was stressed. Hundreds of them. Our mother found them in every jacket pocket for years after he was gone. Marchetti was quiet for a moment. Did he wear the medallion often? Every shift. He said Saint Christopher was the patron of travelers, and he spent his whole career going to wherever the emergency was. He thought it was appropriate. Was there an engraving? Nina stopped. She had not mentioned an engraving, not once. How do you know there was one? Marchetti reached beneath his collar and drew the chain over his head for the first time in. She would later learn, over a decade. He set the medallion on the table between them. Then he turned it over. 2 initials, small, slightly worn. A man put this in my hand on Route 47, Marchetti said. 12 years ago. He said he needed both hands free. Nina could not speak. Marchetti's gaze dropped to the medallion. He didn't come back for it. 12 years earlier, Alessio Marchetti had not yet become the man the city feared. He had been 29 years old, recently elevated within an organization that rewarded ruthlessness and punished sentiment. And on the night of October 14th, he had been in transit to a safe house after a rival crew's attempt on his life that had nearly succeeded. He had been bleeding for 40 minutes when the accident happened. The driver had taken Route 47 to avoid traffic. In the rain, on a curve, a semi had jackknifed 3 cars ahead of them. 4 vehicles impacted. Marchetti's SUV hit the median. His driver was unconscious. Marchetti himself was slumped in the back seat, trying to apply pressure to a wound that had already been applying pressure for too long. Miles Bassett had arrived with the first responding unit. He had not asked questions. Later, Marchetti would remember this specifically, that the young EMT with the loose chain at his throat had simply assessed the situation with the efficiency of someone whose job required him to separate what mattered from what didn't. And what mattered was the wound and the airway and the blood pressure, not the circumstances that had produced them. Miles stabilized him, talked him through it, not with reassurances that everything would be fine, because Miles apparently reserved those for people he thought could be fooled, and he had taken one look at Marchetti and decided, correctly, that this man was not one of them. Instead, he said, "Stay with me. Keep your eyes on me. Tell me your name if you can." Marchetti had told him his first name. Miles said, "Okay, Alessio, you're going to be all right. You lost a lot, but you've still got enough." Then Miles had gone still. It was not a sound that gave it away. In the chaos of an accident scene, sirens, voices, rain hammering metal, Marchetti would not have been able to identify a single sound as significant. What Miles heard, Marchetti never knew for certain, but Miles lifted his head in the direction of a sedan 60 yards down the road, and the quality of his attention changed in a way that Marchetti still could not describe accurately except to say, something in the young man had already made a decision before his body moved. Miles pressed the medallion into Marchetti's hand. "Hold that for me," he said. "I need both hands." He ran. The sedan's gas tank had already been compromised in the impact. It went up 90 seconds later. The child inside it, 8 years old, still buckled in the back seat, was outside the vehicle before the fire took hold. Miles Bassett was not. Nina was silent for a long time after. She had known the general shape of her brother's death, on duty, accident scene, a fire. She had been 17, and the adults in her life had given her facts without details, and by the time she was old enough to understand, she might want the details, and she had told herself, approximately once a month for 12 years, that she would look into it properly when she had the time. "You were there," she said. "Yes. You were the man he stabilized." She looked at the medallion on the table. "He gave you that to hold." "Yes." Nina absorbed this. A year ago, a month ago, even a week ago, she would not have known what to do with a piece of information this size in a room with a man this dangerous. She would have gone quiet and small and waited for instructions. Instead, she looked at Alessio Marchetti, at the controlled stillness and the expression that had never once, in 3 years, given anything away, and said the thing she actually thought. "My mother used to say that knowing someone came home because Miles went toward the fire would make losing him hurt differently." She pressed her thumbnail into her palm without noticing. "Not less, just differently." Marchetti looked at the medallion. "I searched for his name for a long time. I had a first name, a partial unit description, and a face I could reconstruct from memory. It took me 4 years to get the surname. It took me another 3 to confirm he was gone." A pause. The records from that night were incomplete. He was listed under the wrong station number in 2 separate reports. "You searched?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he ran back in, and he gave me something to hold first." His thumb moved toward the medallion without touching it. "I have never been able to settle what I owe a man I cannot repay." "You don't owe Miles anything." Marchetti looked at her. "He made a choice. It belonged entirely to him." Nina met his gaze without flinching, which was something she had never done in 3 years, and which she would think about later in the cab home, slightly astonished at herself. "You holding onto that medallion like it's a debt doesn't honor what he did. It just means the weight of it never went anywhere." The room was very quiet. Marchetti looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite the cold assessment he gave to balance sheets, not quite the controlled courtesy he extended to business partners. Something more considered than either. "You're still on the clock," he said. Nina glanced at the time, the quarterly review. "Reschedule it." He picked up the medallion. For a moment it rested in his palm, worn and silver and very still. Then he returned it to his neck. "I'd like to talk further." The accusation came 6 weeks later. In that time, Nina had continued to do her job with the same precision and invisibility she always had. She had also, on 4 separate occasions, found herself in Marchetti's private office after hours discussing things that were not balance sheets. She had told him more about Miles. He had told her less about himself. That was simply the nature of who he was. But he had listened in a way she had experienced from only a handful of people in her life, as if what she said was worth the space it occupied. She had not told anyone. There was nothing to tell. Technically, it was conversation. Harwick Gould did not see it that way. Gould was the COO, 53 years old, with the particular resentment of a man who had spent 2 decades making himself indispensable and had recently developed the suspicion that someone else was becoming more indispensable faster. He called Nina into a meeting on a Tuesday morning with an HR representative and 2 department heads, and he laid a thin file on the table in front of her. "Miss Bassett," he said, "you told Mr. Marchetti that your deceased brother had a personal connection to him. That's not an accurate summary of what happened. You manufactured a personal connection between your family and this organization's principal in order to gain preferential access." The HR representative was writing something down. The department heads were looking at the file. Nina folded her hands on the table. She was aware that she was the least powerful person in the room by every visible metric. And she was also aware, with the particular clarity that came from 3 years of being underestimated, that Harwick Gould was scared of something. People who were not scared didn't call HR for conversations like this one. "There is a retired highway patrol officer named Dale Whitman," she said, "who filed the first incident report from the Route 47 accident 12 years ago. He is alive, and I believe he would remember an EMT who ran back toward a burning vehicle." She looked at Gould without blinking. "The State Police Archive will have both the incident report and scene photographs. My brother's name appears in the responding EMT log." She paused. "You can manufacture many things, Mr. Gould. You cannot manufacture a public records request." Gould's file sat on the table. "Pending investigation," he said. "You're suspended with pay." Nina stood. She untucked her badge from her lanyard with steady hands, set it beside the file, and walked out of the room without saying anything else. She was in the elevator when the doors opened again and Marchetti stepped in. He looked at her face. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him, short, precise. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, he already had his phone out. "Don't," Nina said. He stopped. "I know what you're about to do." She watched the phone in his hand, one call that could end Gould's career before noon. "If you fix this because you're Alessio Marchetti, every single thing Gould accused me of becomes true." She held his gaze. "I used a story about my dead brother to get close to a powerful man, and then that powerful man protected me. That's what they'll say. That's what some of them already believe." "He humiliated you," Marchetti said. "Yes." "In front of your colleagues." "Yes." "And you're asking me to do nothing." "I'm asking you to let the records prove what happened." Nina's grip on her bag loosened slightly. "If the truth is enough, and it should be, then it doesn't need you to apply pressure to become true. And if it isn't enough, I don't want the version of this where I win because people are afraid of you." Marchetti held the phone for a long moment. Then he put it away. Nina walked out of the building. For 6 days, she heard nothing from the organization. She requested records from the State Police Archive. She contacted Dale Whitman, who was 71 years old, retired in Peoria, and who remembered the Route 47 accident very well. Because in 40 years of law enforcement, he had seen many things, and only a handful had stayed with him the way that moment had. The young EMT running toward the burning car. The wounded man in the grass, clutching something in his fist and calling after someone who could no longer hear him. "He didn't have to go back," Whitman told Nina over the phone. "That's the kind of thing you carry. You see someone make a choice like that, you carry the picture of it." The State Police Archives produced scene photographs. One showed Miles Bassett clearly, kneeling beside a man in the grass, the St. Christopher medallion visible at his throat. The investigative review board convened on a Thursday morning. Nina sat on one side of the table. Gould sat on the other. Marchetti sat at the head, which surprised Gould visibly, because Marchetti did not typically attend HR proceedings. Marchetti did not speak until Gould had presented his case. Then he placed 4 items on the table: the incident report, the photograph, Dale Whitman's signed statement, and his own written account of the events of October 14th, 12 years ago. Mr. Gould accused Miss Bassett of fabricating a personal connection to this organization. Marchetti's voice was conversational, completely level. The records indicate that her brother, Miles Bassett, responding EMT, stabilized me at the Route 47 accident site before returning toward a vehicle fire from which he did not emerge. Officer Whitman witnessed the interaction directly. He looked at the photograph. Miss Bassett fabricated nothing. She recognized an object that belonged to her family and said so. Gould looked at the photograph. She did not request money, position, or protection. Marchetti continued. When I offered to intervene after her suspension, she declined. She asked instead that the truth be established through documentation. He looked at Gould without expression. She was right to do so. You were not. The review board formally rescinded the suspension. Nina's personnel file was cleared. Gould was required to issue a written apology and to deliver it in front of the department heads who had attended the original meeting. The board announced an internal review of procedures that everyone understood was primarily a review of Gould's judgment. When the room emptied, Gould stopped beside Nina's chair. His apology sounded like a sentence memorized under duress. Nina let him finish. I accept it, she said. When the people who heard the accusation hear the correction, it'll mean something. Gould left. Marchetti remained. That was generous, he said. He has to deliver that correction in front of the same people. Nina picked up her bag. That's not generosity. That's math. Marchetti almost smiled. The second alarm fund was Marchetti's idea. He presented it to Nina 3 weeks after the review board, across the desk he usually used to deliver decisions rather than proposals. He wanted to establish a scholarship fund for the children and spouses of first responders killed in the line of duty. He had named it the Miles Bassett Memorial Scholarship. He had already spoken to an attorney. Nina looked at the folder for a long moment. Miles would have hated this, she said. Marchetti blinked. He was constitutionally opposed to being made into a monument. When his captain put his photo in the station break room after he died, his partner told me Miles would have taken it down in a week and replaced it with something completely inappropriate. Nina set the folder down carefully. He didn't run back into that car, so someone would put his name on a building. Then what would he want? Nina thought about Miles arguing with GPS. She thought about the hundreds of origami cranes. She thought about a night she'd been 17 and terrified, and Miles had sat with her in a hospital waiting room and said, almost to himself, "We go back in, that's all. Something else goes wrong. We go back in. Call it the second alarm fund," she said, "when the first alarm isn't enough. When something goes wrong and someone has to decide whether to go back." She looked at Marchetti. The point isn't one person who made one decision. The point is that the decision gets made, over and over, by different people, without hesitation. Marchetti looked at the name he had written on the folder cover. He drew a single line through it. Then he wrote Second Alarm Fund in its place, and his handwriting was precise and deliberate, and entirely unlike a man who was accustomed to being corrected. "Governing board will need a director," he said. "You'll need to post the position properly." "I'll post it properly." A pause. "I'll also know in advance which candidate I'm going to select." Nina took the folder. "I'll review the budget projections." "I know," he said. 6 months passed, the way months pass when a person has stopped measuring time by what they've endured and started measuring it by what they're building. The Second Alarm Fund had 41 scholarship recipients by spring. Nina knew every family by name. Marchetti knew which application she would argue for before she'd finished her first sentence, and had stopped pretending to review them independently after she caught him moving her pre-approved stack without telling her. They had developed habits neither of them named. Coffee after late meetings in the building's small kitchen where the fluorescent lights were honest. Sunday calls that started with fund logistics and ended an hour later on subjects neither of them could have predicted. Marchetti sending her photographs of things he had burned attempting to cook on weekends, usually with no accompanying text, just the image of some ruined protein in a very expensive pan, and Nina responding with the phone number of a restaurant within delivery range. He remembered that she took her coffee with exactly 1 creamer. She was a bookkeeper. She had counted. She noticed that he kept a folded piece of paper in the interior breast pocket of every jacket. She did not ask about it for 3 months. When she finally did, he removed it without ceremony and smoothed it on the table between them. It was a printout of Miles Bassett's EMT incident record from Route 47, worn at the folds, slightly translucent at the creases from having been opened and refolded many times. Nina looked at it without speaking. Then she folded it back along its original lines and gave it to him. "He'd like knowing you kept that," she said. Marchetti tucked it back into his pocket. Neither of them said anything else about it that night. The first annual Second Alarm Fund ceremony was held on a Friday evening in April in a hall Nina had insisted be large enough to hold families and not just donors. There were firefighters in dress uniforms and paramedics who had come straight from shifts, still wearing the particular tiredness of people who had given most of the day to strangers. There were spouses who had spent years being quietly extraordinary in the specific way that people who survive catastrophic loss can become extraordinary if they are given enough time and enough room. On the memorial wall, Nina had hung photographs of 43 first responders who had died in the line of duty over the past 2 decades. Miles Bassett was in the second row, third from the left. He was smiling in the photograph, taken at the station, off-duty, slightly squinting into the sun, because Nina had specifically requested a photo where he looked like himself and not like a commemoration. When the last scholarship was announced, Marchetti asked Nina to stand beside him. She stood beside him, not behind him. He thanked the families. He thanked the scholarship recipients. He thanked the people who had made the fund possible. And then he said nothing further for a moment, which was unusual for a man who was precise about language. He turned toward the memorial wall. Nina watched him cross to it. He stopped in front of Miles's photograph. The room had gone quiet. Marchetti reached beneath his collar and drew the chain over his head for the second time in 12 years. He set the Christopher medallion beneath the photograph, not propped against the wall, not displayed, just set down. The way you set something down when you have been carrying it for a long time and you have finally arrived at the right place to put it. The room was absolutely still. Nina was beside him before she decided to move. She looked at the medallion. She looked at her brother's face. "He asked you to hold it," she said quietly. "He did. You held it for 12 years. "Yes." Nina reached out and touched the edge of the chain. Silver, worn smooth, the clasp still slightly loose, still pulling left of center. "He'd say you can put it down now," she said. "You were just holding it while he was busy." Marchetti's breath was unsteady for exactly 1 second. Then it wasn't. Someone in the room began to applaud. One person, then another, then the whole room, rising without anyone calling them to do it. And Nina let the sound wash over her without moving, because she was looking at the place where the medallion rested below her brother's photograph. And for the first time in 12 years, she understood that Miles was not a file or a story or a wound she was still trying to close. He was a 23-year-old EMT who argued with GPS and burned popcorn and folded paper cranes when he was anxious, and he had made a decision on a rainy highway that had sent his life in one direction and saved someone else's entirely, and that was simply true, and the truth of it was something she could stand next to without falling over. Marchetti turned toward her. He was not the man the city feared in that moment. He was 41 years old, and he had just set down something he had carried since he was 29, and the expression on his face was the most undefended thing she had ever seen on him. "Take me somewhere loud," Nina said. "Loud enough that if I cry, no one can tell." Alessio Marchetti looked at her. Something in him rearranged, quietly, permanently, the way weight shifts when a long-held thing is finally released. "I know a place," he said. And for the first time, in longer than either of them could accurately measure, he offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked out together while the room was still standing, through a door that opened onto an April evening that smelled like rain and the particular freshness of air after a storm has finally passed. Miles Bassett had run back into a burning car 12 years ago, with nothing but both hands free and whatever seconds remained. He could not have known what would follow. He could not have known the frightened man, in the grass, would become someone whose name reshuffled city blocks. He could not have known that his little sister would someday sit in that man's conference room, counting numbers in the dark, or that she would recognize a worn silver chain and say something that would change the architecture of both their lives. What Miles had known, what he'd carried through every shift, every call, every ruined microwave bag of popcorn, was the same thing he'd asked for on a wet highway at 2 in the morning. Hold this for me. Not a request for repayment, not a promise that someone would return for it. Just a man who needed both hands free, trusting a stranger to take care of something small and important until the moment it could finally be put down. 43 photographs hung on the Second Alarm Fund's memorial wall that night. 43 people who had made the same decision in 43 different places on 43 days that had started like ordinary days. The medallion rested beneath one of them, and the promise it carried, not a debt, never a debt, lived now in every family the fund would reach, every child who would carry the education forward, every future built in the space that one decision had quietly made possible. One life held carefully. And because it had been held, many more would go on.